There is a question that has followed human beings since the very beginning of recorded thought, a question asked by kings and beggars, by philosophers and farmers, by people lying awake at 3 in the morning and people laughing in the middle of a crowded room. The question is simple to say and almost impossible to answer. How do I become happy? Not happy for an afternoon, not happy because something good just happened, but happy in a way that holds up when life gets hard. Happy in a way that becomes part of who you are rather than something you chase and never catch. Most people spend their entire lives treating happiness like a prize sitting at the end of a race. Finish school and you will be happy. Get the job and you will be happy. Find the partner, buy the house, hit the number in your bank account, and then, finally, happiness will arrive and stay. But if you have lived even a few decades on this earth, you already know how that story usually ends. The diploma arrives, and within a week you are already worried about the next thing. The job starts, and within a month you are annoyed by your commute or your manager or the fact that Sunday evenings still feel heavy. The house is bought, and within a year you are noticing the crack in the ceiling instead of feeling grateful for the roof. This is not because you are ungrateful or broken. It is because of how the human mind is built, and once you understand that machinery, you can finally stop fighting it and start working with it. Psychologists have a name for this pattern. They call it hedonic adaptation. It means that human beings are extraordinarily good at getting used to things, both good and bad. Win the lottery and studies show that within a year or two your baseline happiness returns to roughly where it was before. Lose the use of your legs in an accident, and researchers have found that within a similar span of time, most people also return close to their prior baseline of life satisfaction. This sounds almost unbelievable, but it makes sense when you consider why this trait might have evolved in the first place. A mind that was never satisfied, that always noticed what was missing rather than resting in what was already there, was a mind that kept searching, kept building, kept surviving. Contentment, from a purely evolutionary standpoint, was dangerous. A contented ancestor might not have bothered to search for the next meal or the next shelter. So we inherited minds that treat satisfaction as temporary by design. Understanding this is not depressing news. It is liberating news, because it means the constant hunger you feel is not a personal failure. It is a feature of being human, and there are ways to work with it rather than be ruled by it. The first thing to understand is that happiness is not one single thing. Researchers who study well-being generally break it into at least 2 different currents that run through a life. The first is how you feel day to day, the texture of your ordinary hours, whether they contain more moments of ease, warmth, and enjoyment than moments of stress, irritation, and dread. The second is a deeper current, something closer to meaning, the sense that your life adds up to something, that you are growing, contributing, becoming who you are meant to be. A life can have plenty of pleasant days and still feel empty if this second current is missing. And a life can be full of struggle and difficulty and still feel deeply worthwhile if this second current runs strong. Real, lasting happiness is built when both of these currents are flowing, not just one. Let us start with the day-to-day current, because it is the one people usually mean when they say they want to be happier. The texture of your ordinary hours is shaped far more by habits than by circumstances. This is one of the most well-established findings in the entire field of positive psychology. Circumstances, meaning your income, your job title, your city, your relationship status, explain a surprisingly small portion of the differences in happiness between people. What explains far more is what you do with your mind and your time inside whatever circumstances you already have. 2 people can have almost identical lives on paper, same income, same city, same family situation, and have wildly different experiences of that life because of the habits running quietly underneath the surface. The first habit worth building is attention. Not attention in the sense of focus at work, but attention in the sense of where you choose to point your mind throughout an ordinary day. The human brain has what scientists sometimes call a negativity bias. It is wired to notice threats, problems, and irritations far more readily than it notices things that are simply fine. This made sense for survival. A rustle in the grass that might be a predator needed far more attention than a beautiful sunset. But in modern life, This bias means that a single rude comment from a stranger can occupy your mind for hours, while 10 kind interactions that same day pass by almost unnoticed. If you want to change how a day feels, the most direct lever you have is training your attention to notice what is going well, not instead of noticing what is going wrong, but in addition to it, so that your picture of the day becomes accurate rather than distorted toward the negative. This is why gratitude practices, which can sound almost like a click copyright by now, have such consistently strong research behind them. Writing down 3 things that went well at the end of each day, or 3 things you are grateful for, is not about pretending life is perfect. It is a form of attention training. You are teaching your mind to go looking for the good, the same way you already automatically go looking for the bad. Over weeks, this repeated practice changes what your mind notices by default, not just when you sit down to write. People who practice this consistently report not only feeling happier, but also sleeping better and feeling more optimistic about the future. The mechanism is not magic. It is repetition, the same way lifting weights repeatedly changes your muscles. Deliberately noticing good things repeatedly changes your mental habits. The second habit worth building is presence. Human beings spend an enormous portion of their waking hours thinking about something other than what is actually happening in front of them. Researchers at Harvard once used a phone app to ping people at random moments throughout their day, asking what they were doing and whether their mind was on that activity or wandering elsewhere. They found that people's minds were wandering nearly half of their waking hours, and strikingly, people were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were focused on whatever they were actually doing, even when that activity was something mundane like commuting or doing chores. Even more surprising, the wandering came before the unhappiness in time, suggesting that the wandering mind was a cause of the lower mood, not simply a symptom of already feeling bad. A wandering mind is not a happy mind, even when it wanders toward pleasant fantasies, because it disconnects you from the one place life is actually happening, which is right now. This is why so many traditions across so many different cultures, long before modern psychology existed, converged on some version of mindfulness or presence as central to a good life. Not because ancient teachers had access to brain scanners, but because they paid careful attention to their own experience and noticed the same pattern researchers are only now confirming with data. When you eat, actually taste the food. When you walk, actually feel your feet on the ground. When you speak with someone, actually listen to them instead of half formulating your next sentence while they are still talking. This sounds almost too simple to matter, but the difference in felt experience between a fully present hour and a half-distracted hour is enormous, even though from the outside they might look identical. The third habit is connection, and this may be the single most well-supported finding in the entire science of happiness. When researchers look across decades of data, across different countries, different age groups, and different economic conditions, the strength of a person's relationships consistently emerges as one of the strongest predictors of both happiness and even physical health and longevity. There is a study that has followed a group of men for over 8 decades, tracking their health, careers, and relationships from young adulthood all the way into old age. The single clearest finding across all those decades is that the quality of a person's close relationships at midlife was a better predictor of healthy, happy aging than cholesterol levels, than income, than even genetics. People who had warm, dependable relationships in their 50s were healthier and happier in their 80s than people who did not, regardless of how much money they had made or how impressive their careers had been. This finding should reshape how you spend your time, because most people, if you ask them, would say they already know relationships matter, and yet very few people actually organize their calendars around this truth. It is easy to let friendships slowly fade through simple neglect, not through any dramatic falling out, but through years of being slightly too busy to call, slightly too tired to visit, slightly too distracted to really listen when you finally do see each other. If you want a concrete, practical action item from all this research, it might be this. Treat maintaining a handful of close relationships with the same seriousness you treat your career or your health. Schedule time with people the way you schedule meetings. Reach out first, rather than waiting to be invited. Ask real questions and actually listen to the answers instead of waiting for your turn to talk. None of this requires having many friends. Research consistently shows that a small number of deep, trusted relationships matters more for happiness than a large number of casual ones. Now let us turn to the second current of a happy life, the deeper one, the sense that your life has meaning. This current cannot be filled by pleasant sensations alone. You can have a wonderful vacation, a delicious meal, an enjoyable evening with friends, and still feel a quiet unease underneath it all if you do not feel that your life, taken as a whole, is moving towards something that matters to you. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived years in concentration camps during the Second World War, spent the rest of his life studying what allowed some people to endure extraordinary suffering while retaining their sense of self, and what caused others to lose themselves entirely. His conclusion, based on both his own experience and decades of clinical work afterward, was that the decisive factor was not the absence of suffering, but the presence of meaning. People who could locate some reason worth enduring for, whether it was a person waiting for them, a piece of work left unfinished, or simply a determination to preserve their dignity, were the ones who came through intact. His insight was not that happiness comes from avoiding pain, because pain is often unavoidable, but that meaning can be found even inside pain, and that meaning is what actually sustains a person through the long run of a life. For most people, meaning is not found in one single grand purpose discovered in a flash of insight. It is built slowly through the accumulation of small choices, through work that contributes to something beyond your own comfort, through relationships where you show up for people who need you, through skills developed and shared over years. If you are searching for meaning and feeling frustrated that it has not arrived in some obvious form, it can help to stop searching for the one big answer and instead ask a smaller, more practical question. What is one thing I could do this week that would make someone else's life a little better? What is one skill I have that the world actually needs? What activity makes me lose track of time because I am so absorbed in it? The answers to these smaller questions, followed consistently over months and years, tend to accumulate into something that feels very much like purpose, even though it rarely announces itself as such in the moment. Another crucial ingredient in a meaningful life is growth. Human beings are built to develop, and stagnation, even comfortable stagnation, tends to produce a quiet restlessness that people often misdiagnose as unhappiness with their circumstances, when it is actually unhappiness with their lack of movement. This is why people who seem to have everything, a stable job, a comfortable home, a settled life, sometimes feel a persistent flatness they cannot explain. The mind was built to solve problems, to learn, to improve at something. When that drive has nothing to work on, it does not simply go quiet. It turns inward and starts generating anxiety or dissatisfaction as a kind of restless signal that something needs attention. This is why picking up a new skill, taking on a challenge slightly beyond your current comfort, or working toward a goal that requires real effort can lift your mood in a way that pure leisure often cannot. Rest is essential, and burnout is real, but so is the particular kind of flatness that comes from a life with no challenge left in it at all. Let us also talk honestly about difficulty, because no conversation about happiness is complete without addressing suffering directly. A common misunderstanding is that happy people are people who do not experience hardship, sadness, grief, or failure. This is simply not how any real human life works. Everyone experiences loss. Everyone experiences failure, rejection, disappointment, and fear at various points. The difference between people who build a genuinely happy life and people who remain stuck in suffering is rarely the amount of hardship they face. It is far more often the relationship they have with that hardship once it arrives. Psychologists who study resilience have found that one of the most important factors is how a person explains difficult events to themselves, something researchers call explanatory style. When something goes wrong, some people tend to interpret it as permanent, pervasive, and personal, meaning they believe the bad situation will last forever, that it will affect every area of their life, and that it happened because something is fundamentally wrong with them. Other people, facing the exact same setback, tend to interpret it as temporary, specific, and external, meaning they believe this particular situation is difficult right now but will pass. Importantly, this is not about denying reality or refusing to take responsibility when responsibility is genuinely yours. It is about refusing to let one difficult chapter get mistaken for the whole story of your life. This is a skill that can be practiced. The next time something goes wrong, whether it is a failed project, a difficult conversation, or a disappointing result, notice the story you are telling yourself about it. Are you turning a single event into a verdict about your entire worth as a person? Are you assuming this feeling will last forever, even though feelings, by their very nature, are temporary? Are you letting one bad area of life bleed into every other area, convincing yourself that because work is hard right now, your relationships and your health and your future must also be hopeless? Simply noticing this pattern and gently correcting it when you catch yourself doing it is one of the most powerful tools available for building genuine resilience over time. Self-compassion deserves special attention here, because so many people, especially those who are highly driven or ambitious, treat harsh self-criticism as the engine of their success. They believe that if they stop being hard on themselves, they will become lazy or complacent. Research tells a very different story. People who practice self-compassion, meaning they treat themselves with the same understanding and patience they would offer a good friend who was struggling, are not less motivated. If anything, they tend to recover from failure more quickly and try again with more energy, precisely because they are not spending their energy drowning in shame. Shame is paralyzing. It makes people want to hide, to avoid the situation that triggered it, to give up rather than try again. Self-compassion, by contrast, keeps the door open. It says, "This did not go well, and that is painful, and I am still someone worth trying again for." That combination of honesty about the failure and warmth toward yourself as a person is far more motivating over the long run than harsh criticism ever is. There is also the matter of comparison, which might be one of the single greatest thieves of happiness in the modern world. Human beings have always compared themselves to others. This is not new, but the scale and constancy of comparison available today, through social media and constant connectivity, is genuinely unprecedented in human history. Where your ancestors might have compared their harvest to their neighbor's harvest, you now have the ability to compare your entire life, at any moment, to a carefully curated highlight reel of thousands of other people's best days. This is a comparison your mind was never built to handle well, and it consistently produces a distorted sense that everyone else is doing better than you, because you are comparing your ordinary, unfiltered daily experience to their filtered, selected best moments. Recognizing this distortion for what it is and deliberately limiting how much of your attention you give to it is not a small lifestyle tweak. For many people, it is one of the most direct ways to reduce a background hum of dissatisfaction that has nothing to do with their actual life and everything to do with a warped frame of reference. Physical health also plays a far larger role in happiness than people tend to give it credit for, not because a perfect body is required for happiness, but because sleep, movement, and nutrition directly affect the biological systems that produce mood in the first place. Chronic sleep deprivation reliably increases irritability, anxiety, and emotional reactivity, making ordinary frustrations feel far larger than they actually are. Regular physical movement, even something as simple as a daily walk, has been shown in numerous studies to reduce symptoms of both anxiety and depression, in some cases with an effect size comparable to medication for mild to moderate cases. This is not to say that discipline about sleep and exercise will solve every emotional difficulty in your life, but it does mean that if you are trying to build lasting happiness while neglecting your basic physical foundation, you are trying to build a house while ignoring cracks in the foundation. Getting these basics right does not guarantee happiness, but neglecting them will actively undermine almost every other effort you make. Money deserves an honest mention as well, because it occupies such a large place in how people imagine happiness will arrive. The research here is nuanced and worth understanding accurately rather than through slogans. It is true that money cannot buy happiness in any direct, simple way once your basic needs, safety and comfort are met. It is also true that having enough money to cover your needs, to handle emergencies without panic, and to have some freedom over how you spend your time is genuinely important for well-being. And pretending otherwise does a disservice to people who are genuinely struggling financially. The honest picture is that money matters quite a lot at lower levels of income, where it relieves real and constant stress, and matters progressively less as income rises further, because at higher levels of security. The additional money increasingly fails to address whatever is actually missing, whether that is time, relationships, health, or meaning. The mistake is not wanting financial security. The mistake is believing that money beyond a point of genuine comfort will fix problems that money was never designed to fix in the first place. If you were to distill everything covered so far into a small number of concrete daily practices, they might look something like this. Begin or end each day by noticing something specific you are grateful for, not in a vague general sense, but something concrete and particular from that actual day. Protect time for the handful of people who matter most to you, reaching out proactively rather than waiting passively. Choose at least one activity most days that fully absorbs your attention, where you are not half distracted by your phone or your thoughts, because full engagement produces far more satisfaction than divided attention ever can. Move your body regularly, protect your sleep as seriously as you would protect any other important commitment, and treat these as non-negotiable foundations rather than optional extras. When something goes wrong, notice the story you tell yourself about it, and gently push back against any tendency to treat one bad moment as proof of a permanently bad life. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love, especially in moments of failure. Limit the time you spend comparing your real, ordinary life to other people's curated highlights. And keep some form of growth alive in your life, some skill or challenge that stretches you a little, because comfort without any growth eventually curdles into a quiet restlessness that no amount of relaxation can resolve. None of these practices are dramatic or glamorous. None of them will make an inspiring highlight in someone else's social media feed, but this is, in fact, the entire point. Genuine happiness is rarely built from a single dramatic transformation. It is built the same way health, skill, or wisdom is built, through small, unglamorous, repeated choices made consistently over months and years, until they quietly become who you are rather than something you have to consciously think about anymore. The people who seem to have figured out how to be happy are not people who found some secret the rest of us are missing. They are, almost without exception, people who have simply practiced these small habits of attention, connection, meaning, and self-kindness for longer than everyone else, until the practicing itself faded into the background, and what remained was simply a way of living. If there is one final thought worth carrying away from everything discussed here, it is this. Happiness is not a destination you arrive at once and then keep forever. It behaves less like a trophy sitting at a finish line and more like physical fitness, something that has to be maintained through ongoing practice, something that will fade if neglected no matter how well it was built in the past, and something that responds reliably and predictably to consistent effort applied over time. This is not disappointing news. It is, in fact, deeply hopeful news, because it means happiness is not something reserved for people with a certain kind of luck, a certain income, or a certain set of circumstances. It is available in meaningful measure to anyone willing to build the habits that produce it, starting from wherever they happen to be standing right now, today, in this very moment which, as it turns out, is the only moment any of us ever actually have. Now tell me which story I want to do next, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.